I'm John Batchelor. Professor Steve Cohen of New York University. Russian history is here. We're watching the flames from Independence Square, the burning tires. This is a stage constructed for provocation. What you're looking at is Europe watching TV, watching Kiev, watching the protest of Yanukovych, but Vladimir Putin as well. So, Steve, detail here. The Sochi Olympics are underway. Putin's hand has stayed because the NBC cameras are there already. You've talked about NBC covering this with unusual briefs. In any event, the reason they're accelerating the process, my information, is because they believe with the world watching, that will stay Yanukovych Putin's hand. Are they right or are they wrong?
Well, I would flip it. Everybody, whoever everybody is, but the consensus was that Putin wanted nothing bad to happen in Ukraine during the Sochi Olympics. And there's 1 week to go. We're in the second week, correct?
Right.
Now, some people thought that after Sochi, he might try to inspire a military crackdown in Ukraine. Other people thought, no, he didn't want that anyway. But everybody agreed that he didn't want anything like this in Kiev during the Olympics. And yet it's happened. So let us add to the list of people who do not control the situation, Vladimir Putin. You mentioned Merkel.
Yes, the detail. Merkel called for a meeting with Klitschko, who is the world-famous champion boxer, along with his brother, and Jan Yatsenyuk, the leader of the Fatherland Party. They went to Berlin and met with her, and she appealed to them for a peaceful resolution. Over the weekend is the information I have. Clearly, it didn't lead to peace.
Well, then there was a follow-up. Klitschko went back to Ukraine, to the protesters in the street, and made some statement like, I will stand here with you until we all die, something like that. Clearly, the Germans got to him. That's not what they had in mind. So at the end of today, Ukrainian time, which I think is about 8 hours ahead of us, Klitschko announced that he was trying to get an appointment with Yanukovych, that is, to take Merkel's advice. And that might happen tomorrow. But we're back to this problem. There are ways out. I mean, look, one rational way out is everybody kicks back, chills out, and agrees to wait till February for the presidential election and perhaps put on the ballot a referendum of whether Ukraine should sign with Europe or sign with Russia. That won't solve a problem, but at least it's a democratic vote. But where are the adults who come to the table and say, we're going to do this and we're going to bring the people behind us into line? Everybody has lost control of the situation. And you remember one of the first things I said to you when we began talking about this. And please remember that I warned about Ukraine back in 2008 when we saw this in Georgia.
You said it was the contest that Putin cannot lose.
And also the one that Washington and Europe were determined to contest, the march on Ukraine. But, I mean, what we've got here is a situation where when moderates, whatever they are, reasonable people who want to negotiate, have lost control, that's the sign that a revolution may be unfolding, because moderates are the first victims of revolutions. Now, it may not have come to that in Ukraine, but it is a kind of, I mean, there are signs of a revolutionary. Western Ukraine, John, is out of the control of the capital, Kiev. It's out of the control. Kiev, the government in Kiev has lost control of large parts of Western Ukraine.
Independence Square is filled with provocateurs. And some of those provocateurs are armed. Some of them are armed. That's been reported for more than a week. This stage set has been arranged by both sides, but the police and the security apparatus are completely ringing Independence Square and have been holding back through the winter conditions, through this encampment, for weeks now. We see a crisis building tonight. There are water cannons, there are fires, but the European televisions are obsessed with this, Steve. I want to go to the European crisis. I don't think this is about Yanukovych. Right. I think this is about the European Union, which has been frail to failing for years because of its mismanagement of money. And money, again, is at the center of this conversation. So, the EU, is it at risk here, Steve?
I need to ask you a question, John. We agree that the EU is in financial crisis. Why then, at this moment, would they propose to take on an obligation to an economic basket case that is Ukraine? What's the thinking here?
the thinking, the best I have, is that the EU didn't want this crisis, that it's been forced by the western part of the country, that's impoverished and has the fantasy that it's going to get into the European labor pools. We know that the EU won't allow that, but still, the dream is that they will join. And Poland, Warsaw's part of this, you know that, Steve. We're playing geopolitics here, but look at the states that border Ukraine and is led by Poland, also Romania, also a piece of the Slovak Republic. All those states, Eastern European, have labor pools that have flooded Western Europe. And so the Ukrainians in Western Europe dream the same dream, Steve, and that's forcing this crisis.
Right. I don't doubt that you're right, but what this means is that the people who are supposed to advise the European Union about this sort of thing should have warned them that if they started with this partnership business with Ukraine, as they did in November, that Western Ukraine was going to seize the lead and transform this from a kind of diplomatic negotiation into a real political crisis. So you've got incompetence in Europe. Political incompetence.
And no center, which is why we're going to come back
to isn't Merkel as close to a center as we have? She controls the purse strings of the EU.
Well, the only thing I can think of is if the United States is leading from behind, I'm unaware what the metaphor is from Berlin, because they lead from the bank and they wait as long as possible to bail out all of EU. Germany doesn't think that this is their problem now. Warsaw thinks it's their problem. Steve, there's shenanigans going on here. I've had it reported to me, and you follow this story much more closely than I do. There's reason, paranoids have enemies. And the Kremlin believes that there is a secret hand going on here, that Warsaw believes that it can find a solution to being caught between the Kremlin and Berlin. Is this it? I don't know.
Well, there is strong evidence that from the beginning, Warsaw, Poland, was leading this incorporation of Ukraine movement, and that their diplomats, their foreign minister, its president, have been in the forefront. There's no question, I think, in Europe that Poland wants influence over Ukraine to offset Germany's growing influence.
We're going to come back with the new Cold War, because Steve Cohen understands that the theater piece here, the theater set, is much larger than Kiev, it's much larger than Eastern Europe, it's even larger than Europe. We're talking about the globe and the contest of the new power bases for the 21st century, Eurasia and the United States. I'm John Batchelor.